Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Welcome to Lifestyle by SK, where wine, cigars, and relationships create that tapestry of extraordinary experience. And so I have a very, very interesting episode for us today. And we're going to be talking about from cornbread to consoles, what happened to our childhood. And this is more of a video going back and looking at what life was like for most of us couldn't remember, depending on your age bracket and everything, what life was like in the 90s, 80s, 90s. But most of the time, the 90s is what I like to refer to because you can incorporate a lot of people who are still in the technological age that we're in right now that are still able to relate to the things that were going on, especially during that time. But if you can just take a moment to just think to yourself, think about the time frames that you were out and about and you riding your bike down the street. You're outside playing tag and chase. You're outside throwing the football, or you're walking down the street, or even sitting on the porch eating a piece of cornbread. Just imagine the sunlight and the evening time, or even if it was midday, just the warm tone that was around us in the neighborhood. And maybe even some of you probably was watching VHS tapes of your favorite movies. Just think about some point that you can lock into. And I want you to hold that true to thought as we're going through today's video, because it's going to be very, very important as we're looking at this. And I brought up the simple aspect of eating cornbread at a neighbor's house for a sense of community perspective that a lot of us can relate to, especially being African American and being within the community. As we know as the hood, you can literally see there's different things that were going on within your block that you could understand that was special to the area that you were in, because you had to make do of what you had in the surroundings that you were in. Because a lot of times there's bad rep that goes around that people are not as successful as they should be, or may grow up with specific problems that may be having to deal with the socio demographics that they're in. I want to use this opportunity to bring a change in the positive things that went on within the communities that most of us can probably attest to or actually remember as we are going through it. But whether you ride your bike over town, stop by a neighbor's house for lunch, gone for hours because your parents more than enough had no idea where you were. Now they knew that you were safe because nobody came by to say that you went to the hospital, or nobody said that you was missing or anything. But the parents allowed you to go around and travel within the community of a reasonable distance without having to worry about where you were or what was going on, because they knew that the neighbors looked out for other neighbors' kids. So the parents did not have to worry as much as what they have to worry about today. And this is what our world was like growing up in the 80s and the 90s. Because I like to use that time slot because that is right before we started getting into the integration of technology into the culture, which changed the shift in how we react and respond to things that we have going on right now. And so think about kids outside playing. So if you was an adult driving at that time, you're driving down the street, you will have to slow up because the kids will be outside playing double dutch in the street, or they're playing hopscotch, they're playing chase and tag, they're outside literally with a basketball, throwing it from curve to curve to see, we call it a curveball. And sometimes we play dodgeball out there, depending on where we were. But most of the time within the inner city, we had the curve where we can literally throw the ball and try to bounce it from one side of the street to the other. And then when a neighbor's car comes by, you know what had to happen? We had to stop, let the car pass by. So the crowd dispersed itself for a second, allowed traffic to go through, and kids went back playing. This is an area of time where things literally made sense to the people that were within that specific community. These are times that I want us to reminisce and bring back with the sense of community, with the sense of purpose, the people knowing who they are around. Think about this for a second. No matter where you grew up at, could you relate to this? Particularly in the South, we had things that were going on in terms of kids riding bikes back in the day up and down the street, playing tag, and now you got kids indoors on tablets, on phones, on video game consoles. And indeed, I acknowledge that the world has changed because, from a technological perspective, I understand that thoroughly. But there's a difference in the way that kids were raised back then than the way that kids are raised right now. One can even ask, is it the style of parenting that has changed? Because now the technology, is it babysitting the kids that we have today versus the streets, versus the playground, versus the bikes, versus navigating within your community was babysitting the kids back in the day with every adult watching. And even if you did something, they will call home and your parents will already know before you walk into the house. Sometimes some kids' parents would meet them where they were acting up at. And they showed up and people turn around, ooh, your mama coming down the street. Come down the street to get you. See, kids got whoopings and spankings back then. There wasn't no calling DHS on folks because they were disciplining their kids, because it functioned with everything was contained within the community. But now things have shifted where you're always in a recording state. People going out, holding their phones up, recording, making sure that if you do anything, it's posted online for somebody who's not in your community to comment on the behavior of how a parent is disciplining their kids has changed. That's what we're missing in the aspect of it right now. But these small towns gave a sense, and it promoted the instance of neighborly love and your neighbors being able to see who you are. They knew who your parents were, they knew who your grandparents were. They were on you. They were on you to make sure that you were doing what you are supposed to be doing, because children had freedom back then to roam about the community. We don't have that community aspect right now, in the sense that everybody's indoors. You maybe see a garage up, depending on what neighborhood that you live in, but particularly in the hood, you do still see people walking around, but it's a lot more dangerous because people are now with their head down, looking at their phones, texting somebody who is literally probably indoors or right outside or next door. So more teenagers are driving now than they did back in the day. So everybody walked everywhere. Today, everybody drive everywhere. The culture has changed so much because only some of us can understand and have experienced what it was like before and what it was like after the technological era that we're in right now. But our playtime was outside because everybody looked out. All the kids looked out for one another. The parents looked out for the kids. Playtime was outside. Playtime was not inside, and the world felt a little bit bigger back then because we were able to go and explore it. But see, now people are so comfortable exploring everything from their phone. They explore ordering food from their phone. And whether they're doing, Uber Eats or Postmates or whatever the new app is out there. So then you have a division of people who have the experience of going and actually talking to somebody to order stuff, and you have the demographics of people who are ordering things specifically online because that's just the way that things have changed so much so right now. And so this is more of an acknowledgement of what we've seen out there, because we definitely need to understand who we are, where we come from, what was our community like, What are the things that change? And it's not a bad thing, and it's not tearing anyone down by any means. It is basically acknowledging what we have out here. Now, when you look at the shift in the culture and everything and why it has changed over the course of time, remember the old newspaper clippings of missing children cases were shown like in the paper. And then you had families, now who are walking past one another because now, well, take that back. The kids that were missing back then posted in the papers first. Now you get the Amber Alerts on your phone. So if you got an iPhone, your phone's going to start going off like crazy, especially if a kid is missing. However, like families now will walk past each other on the street without even interacting with one another versus then people interacted with one another. Because I can remember when people will walk around the block in groups. Sometimes you'll see 5 to 15 people in a group walking. They walk to the local store. They'll grab a stack because we had like a little store within our neighborhood that had snacks. That had like cookies, chips, jungle juice, Chico sticks. We had we didn't really focus on a lot of like the M&Ms and Snicker bars and stuff like that. Like we had a local store. I mean, that store served bologna sandwiches that kids can go and eat. They served the different penny candy, pickles. There was local within our community, and we would walk to the store, get the jungle juice, get something to drink, and then walk the block. That was it. There was no phones. Your parents had no idea where you were. There was no debit cards floating around. Sometimes people will pull their resources and money together so everybody in the group could really enjoy a snack. We just don't have that anymore. And if we do, it's in very, very small towns where people still have their phones now, so still a little bit more technologically driven than what they were. But now you have much more busier streets with cars passing by and fewer sidewalks. See, we had sidewalks. We had a lot of them in the community. But when you were within the inner city, within the hood, you had sidewalks. You had a street you could walk on, and people would walk on the sidewalk. But then you go to some communities outside the hood, you will have much more of streets, so people will walk on the streets. But everybody stayed within a confined area that they knew, and they didn't go outside of that. And this was just in a small town. This is not talking about the people who were in the city life, because I never experienced growing up in that time in a city life of what that's like. So I can imagine the different stories that were going on there, and they were probably much more advanced than where we were growing up anyway. But just seeing families, it was more kids walking around now. Now you see families walking around. Maybe if they see a family outside, they're probably going walking for exercising. We were getting the exercise. We was walking to really kind of communicate and talk with one another about what's going on throughout the day, the week, or whatever. People sometimes would just stand outside in a huddle and just talk. That was the social media for us within our community, without technology, talking face to face, people roasting each other, as we say, people joning on each other back in the day, like all that. People were still getting bullied, getting chased up and down the road. No, everybody returned back home, was able to go home at the end of the day. That's literally how it was. And so to kind of give you just a little bit of insight so that you can actually see the references that I was talking about in terms of like cornbread. For example, I remember in the very instance, we had a neighbor within our block, literally just a few doors down. She would seem like she would make cornbread like every single day, but maybe it was like once a week, and it seemed like every day as a kid. But how many of you have ever heard of hot water cornbread? So hot water cornbread to me reminds me a little bit of pancakes in the sense, just a little bit thicker, but not, it's just sweet or whatever. But if you could take a look here, and this is just a site that I found online, so you can definitely look at different images and stuff. But hot water cornbread looked more like this back in the day. So you will see things like this on a dinner table, mid-afternoon snack, whatever. So if you grew up in the South, you had a grandma who knew how to actually cook, which I'm sure most of you have. She probably made cornbread, the cornbread from scratch in the pan. People call it by different names. And then also Jiffy cornbread as well. But the other one was the skillet cornbread, which one of our neighbors used to fix. And I remember as clear as day playing out in the backyard running. She would literally see us outside. She said, "Hey, would you all like a piece of cornbread?" And she not only had to feed her grandkids and her family, but because we were like family to her, we was out there running to her house just to get a piece of cornbread. So now when you look at how society is, I'm sure if most of you are parents, you wouldn't even allow your kid to probably go to your neighbor's house to eat without you being there. And that's a good thing because you want to make sure your children are safe. But we wasn't even thinking about things like that. We will literally go to the neighbor's house, sometimes go in the neighbor's house, eat, come back outside and play. They'll make sure that we were hydrated, had water. We'll go turn on the faucet outside, get some water or whatever the case may be. We were just playing, having a good time. But that pan cornbread that lady made, and even when I would see like her grandkids now as of today, and I would reminisce back on that story because we had this sense that the community took care of the kids, the community fed the kids, and as such. And it was a good time of just being able to just move within our community and hang out. Now, most of you could probably look at Jiffy, probably growing up a little bit, more getting closer to the 2000s. People started getting Jiffy. Jiffy's been around for a long time, but if you were part, here in the South, you wanted sweet cornbread with whatever that you're making. Most people had it with fried chicken and stuff a lot like that. That's what they was eating there. They would make this into a pan. You can make it into muffins. They would make it into a pan and have that. And that was what this is what life was like for us growing up, because we literally we played outside, we hung out. Like, this is what we had growing up in the South. Now, it'd be really interesting to see how people were growing up in other like larger communities and stuff. But I miss that like a lot, because that right there was back in the old days. Now, when you look at the safety concerns as they're growing right now, you got news stories of parents who are missing kids because kids are getting snatched up. Neighborhoods, trust aspect has faded because nobody wants to tell anybody what happened if they saw something. And we have a culture around that, which is just sad because the world just doesn't feel smaller. It also feels less safe because we used to go far off from home and knew to come back home when the streetlights turned on. And even now with parents who are more technologically savvy, may have GPS locations on their kid's phone, or kids may have Apple tags somewhere in their bag, just something in their phones. They're more connected. Kids seem like they're coming up more missing today than they were like back in the day. But the technology aspect has been a major influence on children, because kids are now glued to couches. They're glued to video games. They're glued to social media, scrolling up and down their phone. They're all tied into the icons and floating things across the screen. And parents are checking location trackers on phones now. And so then these, from the 90s, then came these, screens and social media and gamings offered adventure for kids to explore the world without even leaving their living room. But that came with the price that we had to pay, the children have to pay today, is they pay by less sunshine, meaning they're no longer outside anymore. They're getting less sunshine. Seem like they're getting more sick. There's less independence, and there's less connection with other children within the community because everybody's not in their safe place. And so did we trade safety for freedom? I really want to bring you all in on this to just see, for those of you who experienced it, what your thoughts are, and those of you who have not experienced, would you have liked to have experienced that, of what we went through and experienced back in the day? Because just having the memories of kids, us as kids being outside in a mix of, kids playing amongst each other, could you still have that in today's society and how technologically driven that we are right now? So I definitely want to hear your stories. If you have any out there, it would be great to connect with other people to see how you all experienced different things, because I definitely want to see how parents, if you are parents, I want to see how you all are raising the kids today. Because I want to look at, how do you think it would be possible to bring the childhood from inside the house, being glued to tablets, to being outside and exploring the real world? Definitely want to hear from you all. With that, like, listen, subscribe to the channel. Lifestyle by SK, where wine, cigars, and relationships create the tape shift extraordinary experience. Until the next time, check you later.